Welcome to the first episode of MMA Weigh-In 6th round. For MMA Weigh-In, I'm Navid Razi from Dallas, Texas, and World MMA award-winning journalist John Morgan for MMA Junkie and USA Today, weighing in from Sin City, Las Vegas, Nevada. And John, a pretty big event this past Saturday featuring Georges St-Pierre returning to action after being out of the Octagon for over 18 months and undergoing reconstructive surgery for his ACL. And a lot of guys don't come back the same from an injury like that, but GSP went out, found probably the best medical team that money could buy, and came back with a vengeance, earning a unanimous decision victory over interim welterweight champion Carlos Condit. And John, we wondered how GSP would come back from the knee injury with being out this long, coupled with the ring rust. And I thought he would beat Carlos Condit, but I definitely did not think he would come in swinging and as dominant the way he did, considering all of the obstacles he was forced to overcome.
Yeah, you really just can't say enough about Georges St-Pierre's performance, to be honest, Navid. I mean, this was a great performance regardless of anything. I think it was one of the best fights of his entire career, to be honest with you, especially with how dangerous Carlos Condit is. But you add in all the things that he was dealing with, you know, the layoff, the recovery of the knee. It was just absolutely spectacular. I actually picked Carlos Condit in an upset simply because of all the things that Georges St-Pierre was going to have to be dealing with. I thought all those variables would just be too much, but Georges St-Pierre proved why he's one of the best fighters to ever play this game. Incredible. And to be honest with you, Navid, this is the kind of fight that gets me excited about watching Georges St-Pierre again, because there was a stretch there lately in his career where he was just kind of grinding out these boring type wrestling decisions. This was an exciting fight, and he looked dominant. This just, you can't say enough great things about Georges St-Pierre.
For as dominant as Georges St-Pierre looked, there was a moment there where he probably was sweating a little bit. He got caught with Carlos Condit. I mean, one of the most awkward kicks I think I've ever seen in MMA. I mean, his head was almost on the ground, and he came out of nowhere with that left kick from Albuquerque and almost knocked Georges St-Pierre out. But even though Georges St-Pierre was dominant in this fight, there was he did take a lot of damage. I mean, if you look at his face after the fight, he had the ice pack on his head in the post-fight press conference, big hematoma all over his face, and was swelled up pretty bad, even though he left Carlos Condit pretty bloodied up. But it definitely, although it was a dominant performance by Georges St-Pierre, maybe it wasn't as dominant as he was hoping as far as making the Anderson Silva fight. Joe Rogan and Mike Goldberg mentioned in the broadcast that Georges St-Pierre looks bigger than he ever has in the Octagon. Do you think Georges St-Pierre, before the fight, came into this building up to move to that middleweight division? Because he has said he doesn't want to bounce back and forth between welterweight and middleweight. Once he moves up, he wants to stay there. Do you think he's building his body up to move up to middleweight? And furthermore, do you think the kick that he caught from Carlos Condit in the controversy maybe made him pull the reins back as far as challenging Anderson Silva?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, he definitely looked bigger and more muscular than we've ever seen before, but I didn't get the impression that he thinks he wants to go all the way up to 185 pounds. And I say that simply because at the post-fight press conference, you know, he was asked about it, and he kind of said, well, I wonder what Anderson can get down to. You know, can he get down to 178? Can he get down to 170? I wonder what he can get down to. It was never a question of what he can come up to. So that leads me to believe he wants Anderson Silva to meet him somewhere. Now, it was a little disappointing, I think, for some people that he wasn't all about this fight. Dana White said coming in, if George can get by Carlos Condit, we're going to do Georges St-Pierre, Anderson Silva. It didn't seem like George was really down for that fight, at least not right now. But I think I got to give him a little bit of pass on that. You mentioned, you know, how beat up he was, and the fact that he did have a big ice bag on his head in the press conference. I think, you know, he had just been through a war for the first time in 18 months, and brutal of his career. So I kind of understand why maybe he wasn't necessarily ready to just line up that next fight. Honestly, I think Anderson Silva beats Georges St-Pierre, and I think a lot of people really want to see Anderson Silva versus John Jones first. But I think that's more the hardcore fan of it. I think the casual fan is down for this Anderson Silva versus Georges St-Pierre fight. And I got to say, I'm kind of down for it too now. Not because I think it's going to be a real competitive matchup. I think Anderson Silva beats him fairly comfortably just because of the size difference. Anderson Silva is a huge middleweight. But these guys are two most dominant champions of our current generation right now. The heads of these MMA crazy countries of Brazil and Canada. And I think this would get a lot of mainstream and casual attention. So I hope that Dana White can get this fight arranged. And I tend to think Georges St-Pierre, once he rests up a little bit and sees the type of paycheck he can earn for that fight, will be down for this fight.
Absolutely. It'll be the biggest pay-per-view event in UFC history by far. And as you mentioned, even though we would prefer to see John Jones first and Georges St-Pierre next, either way, either fight that happens is going to be absolutely fantastic. Regardless of who fights who, you can guarantee that Navid Razi, John Morgan will be here to cover it. Thanks for checking out this episode of MMA Weigh-In 6th Round. For Navid Razi in Dallas, award-winning journalist for MMA Junkie and USA Today, John Morgan in Sin City, Las Vegas. We'll catch you next week.